I am Jim, the author of the blog Reverse Engineering: The Origins of SARS-CoV-2. I thought we'd do a Q&A here session on this complicated subject called lab leak. A few questions are redundant, a few questions are easy, a couple of questions are hard to answer, but I think if we work through it together, bring some clarity to this subject. So here is the homepage I've been using to start off this conversation. I added a couple of links here based upon the productive feedback from Ron Oons about references from the book. Here's the book, by the way, in case you didn't know, on Amazon. Here's my email address if you want to contact me with questions, jim.haslam@protonemail.com. And here's kind of a layout of my thinking and how this whole, blog, book, debate evolved, at least from my perspective. It started off with a debate for the Rutgers professor who said, the Batwoman in Wuhan, she seemingly could engineer the SARS-2 genome, and I said she couldn't. And that kind of led to this blog. And then I thought that was backed up pretty well with Major Murphy's evidence in the DARPA diffuse document, in particular his letter. But then, the book, I wrote was written to answer one simple question: why does this old world virus called SARS-2 love new world lab animals? So I think it's a fun little subject that involves this chap right here, Tony Fauci, a lot more than any of us realized. So, let's begin with some of these questions y'all have had. Again, these are Substack questions, Twitter questions. Feel free to contact me anyway with them. Put them out there in the open. Contact me in private. I'll keep your anonymity. It's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but I think it's an interesting one because it's got an interesting ending. So, Jim, in the diffuse proposal, there was a lot of talk about testing these viruses in humanized mice models and human epithelial cells. This is to be done at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Why do you exclude this as a possible lab leak scenario? Wouldn't this explain human infectivity too? So, the humanized mouse debate, a lot of it recently, is based upon an email, and it's this one right here. It's not an email; it's more of a draft of the DARPA diffuse documents. So, in 2018. February, March, Peter Daszak was putting together the DARPA diffuse proposal, which is kind of the pre-confession of the crime of creating COVID. And in this document, Peter Daszak here, PD, says, Ralph Barrick of UNC, sheezingly the WIV, if we win this DARPA contract, I do not propose that all of this work will necessarily be done by Ralph, but I do want to stress the U.S. side of this proposal so that DARPA are comfortable with our team. Once we get the $14 million in funds, we can allocate who does what exact work. And I believe a lot of these assays can be done in Wuhan as well. So here he is conducting binding assays to humanize 2 and humanize mice. So this is the diffuse draft, but it also wound up in the final. So Dr. She'll do the exact same thing, binding assays of some humanized mice work. So what was in the draft and caused controversy was in the final document. So no harm, no foul. Binding assays, according to Peter Daszak and even DARPA guys, are just their PCR tests. They're harmless. And humanized mice work is harmless. How do we know? Because she seemingly did have humanized mice inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and Barrett gave her some of the not latest models, but some recent models from like 2016. And it's more mouse than it is human. The word human was put in front of a mouse, and everyone thought they were a mouse. And it's anything but. So if we go into this 2014 interview between Ralph Barrick and NPR, and we search for transmission, we can see the way he's thinking. It's the one thing I would feel most concerned about doing is giving them coronaviruses that one missing trait that means transmitting easily between humans. So Barrick likes to study infection, but not transmission, essentially. And down here at the bottom is this somewhat infamous line now. Number 1, mice don't sneeze, said Barrick. And even if they do, which people seem to think they do for whatever reason, here's the best part of the line right here. And the process of adapting these coronaviruses to mice actually makes the germs less able to infect human cells. So this essentially eliminates humanized mice as a pandemic model in the creation of the SARS-CoV-2. And how do we know that Barrick's mice literally do just like he says he does, less able to infect human cells? Because every time a mouse has bitten a lab technician at UNC, and there's been 6 recorded accidents from 2015 to 2020. You can go into this document right here from ProPublica about UNC and their accidents, and we can search the word sickened. Neither were sickened. None were sickened. Neither were sickened. The researcher was not sickened. It's just one accident after another, yes, but the researcher's not sickened by this. Mouse bite, mouse contamination, mouse-adapted virus, as they call it, as Barrett calls it. It is a perfectly safe model for doing coronavirus research. This is a good example of lab leaks essentially happening on a in this case, a yearly basis. There's 6 and 5 years, so more than a yearly basis. So they happen all the time. So the question then becomes, in my mind, what leaked? The question isn't lab leak, it's what leaked. What caused the pandemic? And it's not a humanized mouse model. So I think that's pretty much eliminated. And the other part of the question was about human airway epithelial cell cultures. So, just to close up on mice right quick, I'll finish this.
And the key here was further adapting it. So you had originally described 2 amino acid changes in spike that allow the virus to bind mouse ACE, and this is further adapted. That makes it lethal?
Yes. So Barrick had to adapt the SARS-2 genome from Wuhan to infect mice, his humanized mice and everyone else's humanized mice. So that's just, it's not, a suspect. The humanized mice are not a suspect, at least in the creation of SARS-CoV-2. Never in the history of COVID has one lab mouse infected another. Humanized HAS2, BLTL, whatever you want to call it. It's never happened. It never will. It never has. So that's because COVID has more to do with bats than it does mice. So here's Barrick in 2017 talking about jumping species, and he's talking about bats, and he's talking about spike binding and cleavage necessary for this to happen. And he's down here talking about the immunology of a bat, and they love bats because they basically have tank-like immune systems, and they can sit there and test them and tinker with them and see what they can do that we can't do. So you can inject the virus into a bat, and it doesn't bother it. You inject the virus into us humans, and it kills us. So it's intriguing to virologists. And Barrick is not a doctor. He's a PhD, but he's also specifically a veterinarian. He studies animals, and bats were the new animal to study. Mice are kind of old school. Bats are the new school. You'll find bats mentioned 300 times in DARPA Diffuse. You'll find mice mentioned just 10, if I haven't mentioned that already. So that's what this thing's all about. Bats, not mice. Here's another a decent talk about in vitro not being a where is it? Right here. I seem to have lost my place on it. It's the in vitro basically not being a pandemic model for work, for transmission work. In vitro meaning in the glass, human airway epithelial cells. It's not used for transmission research. So human airway epithelial cells are not used for transmission.
The viruses that are being shed from the cats, and then at least maybe in a primary cell culture system like human epithelial cells, look and see what it does to human cells. Like, do viruses that are shed from cats have the potential for infectivity, cell killing? Because I realize you're not going to be able to do transmission to humans, but could you model transmission?
I think modeling transmission in vitro is nearly impossible, right? What we know.
It's impossible. We're looking for an in vivo model, essentially, and cats aren't it either. He goes on to say, you can't affect the cat, but the cat doesn't transmit it to other cats. So, if you're looking for a transmission model, that efficiently works for SARS-CoV-2, what is it? It's the hamster. It is the hamster. It's called the Syrian hamster, and they love it. They love it good, and because it works. It works as both an infection and a transmission model, and it's also here we go, right here, the tropism they like too. So it is the ideal model.
A little bit of history, then of course the explosion of hamster research following the emergence of SARS-CoV-2, some of the advantages and current needs. So when I looked at influenza virus in PubMed and Syrian hamsters, I really found 2 papers.
So Syrian hamsters are a transmission model for SARS-2, and that's a good little clue to who did this. You'll find Syrian hamsters in the DARPA research FOIAs deep inside of here. You'll find hamsters. So replace the word mice with hamster, and a lot more will make sense about this whole pandemic. To be honest with you, what was another question that we had here? I think we're going to move on to Danny on this whole list of things here. And it's the Vero cells. That's the last thing I wanted to talk about. So Vero cells are what Xi Jinping used in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So she does not have human airway epithelial cells. Xi Jinping has Vero cells, and Vero cells would delete the fear and cleavage site immediately.
In cell culture. So if you pass SARS-CoV-2 in Veros, you lose. Yeah, you lose it very rapidly. Little deletions and point mutants come up within 3 passes, so we got out.
So the Vero cells were in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and they would delete the fear and cleavage site immediately, even if she was working within cell culture. So the next question, I think, becomes about Danielle and her role in this whole thing. So let me see if I can reset this thing. This is about the human airway epithelial cells. So the human airway epithelial cells that you hear referenced a lot by others is essentially the based upon this one guy right here. So he's claimed human airway epithelial cells are inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And he's referenced a document, though, that basically says 2 pages down from this one is this one. And in here it says the University of North Carolina, U.S. government selected labs. Some virus growth studies will be conducted in primary human airway epithelial cells, essentially is what it's saying. So it is, human airway epithelial cells are exclusive to UNC and their cystic fibrosis department, which is basically a lung transplant department. They take the old neglected lung and recycle it into Barrick's petri dish in his lab, and he uses it to grow. What is a human airway epithelial cell? It's basically your human lung living in a petri dish. It's just got the mucus and the hair and all this other nasty stuff that goes along with it that Barrick can use to replicate potential pathogens. It sounds nefarious, but it's really not. He's just seeing, if this pathogen grows well in a human epithelial cell, it has potential for pandemic potential. So, or pandemic potential. Period. So, it's a bit of a misnomer to think that there's devices or research going on inside that BSL-2, that's humanized mice or vero cells that can create SARS-CoV-2. So, anything more on this, let me know. It's not an easy subject to digest, but there's a lot of evidence pointing away from that BSL-2 lab as the origin of SARS-CoV-2. So, Jim, have you discussed your theory with Danny Anderson? So that's another question from a reader in Substack. So yes, I have sent this post number 1, this 2.5-year-old post number 1 to Danny. And I said, give me an alibi or give me Munster, and she gave me neither. So I turned around and gave the post to her boss, Nympha Wong, and I said, confirm or deny your resignation on January 10, 2020, and he did. So I thought I was done with Wuhan, and I was more interested, in who created this thing instead of where it leaked. But I've given her a chance to give me, an alibi. But to her defense, Danielle Anderson said she was working on coronaviruses here in February of 2020. This was to NBC News. Early in the pandemic, she's telling us the truth. So this is before, the lockdowns, before, all the other crazy stuff that came out about it.
No one seems to know this, but Amazon
and here she
has
is, as soon as we get past this ad, she's going to give...
Outside central Singapore is an animal research lab where scientists have isolated the purest form of the coronavirus that causes COVID-19 and keep it locked under the strictest of security.
So now we're going into the main lab, and inside this lab here is where we keep the live virus.
The live virus.
Real
have
quick,
isolated the pure research lab where scientists have...
It moves quick, doesn't it?
This
is Duke Nuss. This is Duke in Singapore. She's now she's now back home, as she lives out of a suitcase, but she's back home in Singapore working at Duke University. This is basically Duke University in Singapore. They call it Duke Nuss, National University of Singapore. But it's basically, Danielle trained in Durham, North Carolina. Nympha Wang travels to Durham, North Carolina twice a year. She trained and transferred protocols to this bat lab here that she works at. So this is Duke University in Singapore. The guy that runs Duke Nuss has to travel to Durham, North Carolina once every 5 years to renew their charter. So this is quite an operation, barbed wire fence and, guy's got the gun drawn on him basically right there. I don't know what the heck that means. But yeah, stay away. It's like some backup power generator. I don't know what it is. I guess it is. But, whenever people ask about ways the COVID could have leaked from the BSL-4, the power goes out, and then you lose, negative air pressure. There's all kinds of ways for this thing to leak. But,
animal research lab where scientists have isolated the purest form of the coronavirus.
She's giving us basically is of the bat lab. She's basically saying I don't have anything to hide. But what I like it is that it shows what she works on. She works on bats, live bat research. This is what DARPA Diffuse was all about, live bat research. So she's giving us, definitely a hands-on. She goes in here to handle the bats, and you will not find live bats in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or inside the Wuhan wet market, but you will find at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So how do we know that? It was a bit of a mystery, but Peter Daszak admitted it. So this was kind of an interesting tweet. This is May of 2024, so I'm recording this in January 2025. The real irony is that the first credible info I got about a bat colony was later on when I was when I led the Lancet Origins probe, and Danny Anderson confirmed it. We managed to get the WIV to confirm it. This was a bat colony inside the Institute of Virology, inside Danny's BSL-4, essentially. So there are live bats in Danny's BSL-4, which isn't a big surprise if you know what Danielle Anderson is. She's a bat immunologist. And so you're thinking, like, live bats, what's the big deal? Well, that was pretty much everything about lab leak. The entire, debate was, what is this thing? Is it a bat virus? Is it a bat vaccine, as I claim? So, it has to do with bats, obviously. This is Danielle's. I don't know what I would call this. Basically, here she is in February 2020, developing an antibody test, and she never released the results from this test, by the way, as best I can tell. So, more stuff on Danielle, because he's asking me, can you prove that Danielle, here's the follow-up question to, did I discuss my theory with Danny Anderson? Can she prove she worked on Ebola, or can you prove she didn't? So, this is I can't prove the negative, but I can prove that she's a 100-plus paper long resume here. And there's not one of them that does Ebola, at least to my memory. I think there's one with Ebola that has, this is 2021, that's post-pandemic. Here's one in January 2019. So she's the mid-author on this one right here, with Shizeng Li, ironically. So this is the one paper you will find where they have her on it as a mid-author. But out of all the other papers, it's all going to be Nipah. It's going to be MERS. It's going to be SARS. Tons of MERS, tons of. How many SARS are there? There's tons of SARS in there. These are obviously the post-pandemic papers, so it doesn't really count. But she's really a Nipah, Hindra type of researcher. So she does know, bat immunology, and that's what she is, a bat immunologist. And I asked a scientist, a doctor, to tell me what she thinks about Danny, and she came back and she wanted to speculate. And I thought it was kind of interesting what she wrote here. She's a technician. She did her PhD. It took 3 years off to get it, though. She seems smart. She can write and knows the lingo. She did not get an academic job. She travels a lot. She travels a lot with her cell phone. She travels a lot with her CV. And then she settled down at Singapore, and she was the assistant professor there. She was, basically Limpa Wayne Jr. So it gave her broad experience. Then this is the interesting point. This is what I really liked about this. This is, again, an anonymous scientist replying back to me about looking at Danielle Anderson's long resume. Being on so many papers as a minor author is probably the result of performing some lab tests and supplying reagents or animals or viruses to others. She probably has lots of connections with other research groups, but she still is research primarily responsible for. So yeah, that explains why there's so many. By age 40, she's on 100 papers. I thought that was a lot, but that explains why. She's a lab rat. She's in the lab doing all this research. She gets included as a mid-author on most of it. So her current career, she's in the biodefense gravy train. I mean, you can see that basically. Live bat research is biodefense research. It's where the money is right now, or where it was, still is. She could get off it. She's no longer at Duke. She's now at a smaller BSL-4 and back in her home of Australia. But this is kind of the line that really kind of finishes it off. My sense is that Fauci's money and connections have influenced virology around the world. It's hard to find virologists willing to break rank. So who was Danielle Anderson? She was Fauci's, contractor inside the Wuhan BSL-4. She was working to get a piece of the $82 million Creed bid. That was the big bid in 2019. Everyone was bidding on it. Christian Anderson, Eddie Holmes, apparently even Christian Drosten's on it. So yeah, every virologist on the planet was working on this $82 million 2019 bid for the NIAID Creed project. And Danielle was one of them. That's what she was doing inside that Wuhan BSL-4. So she gave away a lot, though, in this interview. I'll talk about that in a minute, about the various emails she sent going into it. But in this June 2021 interview, she talks about being in the BSL-4 alone. So she's kind of got it all to herself, essentially. Her colleagues are in some distant command center far away. She's adamant, though, she wasn't sick, and I fully believe her. She's a fully, healthy runner. If people were sick, I assume I would have been sick, and I wasn't. I was tested for coronavirus before I was vaccinated. I never had it. So that would have been 2021. So she never released these results, though, from February 2020. So, it's just another question mark, but I'm not really wanting to dwell on Danny's, story too much. Then the last question on this Danny thing was, do we know for sure Danny lived and isolated in the Wuchang dormitory? So have inferred she lives in the Wuchang dormitory because she catches the bus next door to it at the Chinese Academy of Science and takes it down 20 miles south of Wuhan to that remote BSL-4. So everyone in Wuhan, Xi Jinping or BSL-2, Daniel Anderson and the Chinese Academy of Science and all the shopping and all the lifelight, all the nightlife are here at downtown Wuhan, downtown Wuchang. So that's essentially where everyone is, and they all catch the bus and ride it to this remote BSL-4 20 miles south of town. So her cell phone is no longer in the BSL-4 in October 2019 when the whole BSL-4 is vacated, but it's still in Wuhan. She's still in Wuhan at that time. And then she goes back, with their boss Limpa Wang in the end of November, and they walk out of Wuhan together, basically for the last time ever. What's another question here? If Danny didn't have a needle incident, what else could have caused the pandemic? There's tons of ways we talked about, the power being lost. Someone goes in there and chooses the HEPA filter, but she is the bat immunologist in charge of this bat experiment that resulted in COVID-19. Once you understand that COVID-19 is a contagious bat vaccine, she's literally the only person on the planet. The only person on the planet that can test it is Daniel Anderson, because she has access to the live Chinese horseshoe bats. So that's a big piece we'll talk about here in a minute. So someone else came along and asked me about the Creed document and it being close to diffuse. Jim, I had a look at Daszak's Creed proposal. In contrast to his DARPA diffuse proposal, it appears his NIH proposal wasn't about vaccines and virus engineering, and also appears his proposal wasn't funded or even accepted by late 2019. Do you agree, or did I miss something? It's not easy to see it. I'll admit that. I've been looking at that Creed document, closely for a long time, because I always suspected it had something to do with COVID, and it does. I mean, here we go with this. This is a little snippet right here. There's quite a few in here in this long thread of mine. But the UNC and Needle have veterinary staff housing for the care of bats and experimental infections in their facilities. So this is a bat infection, scope of work, which is basically a bat vaccine. You infect the bat first to vaccinate it second. Anytime they're infecting bats, they're working on a vaccine for the bats. It's kind of, you can't just search the literature for bat vaccine. You search for bat infections. Challenge trials is what this thing really sounds like, more so than not. So this is another little snippet. This is the DARPA diffuse scope of work, or sub-vendors, I should call it. Limpa Wang obviously is an important part. And here we go with Peter Daszak and his group. And then we got Ralph Barrick over here. And then up here is the Xi Jinping and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So you'll find this 2018 document is very similar to this 2019 Creed document from Fauci and NIAID. So we got Dr. Wang, Limpa Wang, Daniel Anderson, all the EcoHealth people are the exact same. The UNC people are basically the exact same. They replaced Amy Sens with Sheehan because she left. So there's a lot of overlap there in the Creed document and the diffuse document. It's easy to see in the book where I have two columns. One shows the people on both sides of the column, being on both sides of the ledger, the scope of work and what they do. And here's another little thing. I just want to keep harping on this thing that, everyone was infecting bats. Everyone wanted to vaccinate bats. Even Tony Fauci here in January 8th of 2020 was editing bat vaccine literature, essentially. I mean, this to me is pretty shocking. It was so shocking. I'm not going to, well, I will play it because it's so funny. Let's see if it plays here. Even the TWIV people are perplexed.
Look who contributed this. Look who edited this manuscript.
Tony Fauci. I'm the one who pointed that out.
I didn't know that.
I noticed it right away. Was that Fauci edited it, which was ironic, considering the fact that he didn't do anything. At least.
Well, he's the Academy member who.
He's the Academy member.
Yeah, but you could send it in like.
It was weird why Fauci's editing a bat vaccine paper.
This is a study mainly driven by the EcoHealth Alliance, but with lots of collaborators. First author is Jonathan Epstein, who was on TWIV. The TWIV I did in, actually, it was in 1980, crashing and burning to get rid of the forest, and that was called Toddy.
I'm not going to play this whole thing. You can find it on my Twit feed if you want. But they're talking about, these are virologists, TWIV, This Week in Virology, talking about the excitement of Tony Fauci editing what is essentially a bat vaccine paper in January of 2020. So, this is where the frontier is, even Fauci's involved in this. So, and that's, what DARPA diffuse is really all about. What else did he mention here? So this document, as it loads, is big, 1,967 pages, but it's the mother lode. It's got it all in here, man. It's definitely in here. So this is another question people come up with. Did you ever find the fear and cleavage site in the DARPA in the DARPA diffuse document? They literally say they're going to do a fear and cleavage site. And did you ever find that in the NIAID documents? And at the time, I would have to say no, because it wasn't there. But here it is in the very bottom of this draft that they were going to submit. Ralph Barrick has referenced his fear and cleavage sites. Essentially, that's the same reference he used in the DARPA diffuse proposal, but it's now being used in a NIAID grant draft. It didn't make the final document because of space constraints. But you'll also find in this document, this is on U.S. Right to Know, a FOIA. They had to go to the, we can't FOIA, Danielle's emails because it's Duke University. It's a private university. But USU, this Uniformed Service University, it's basically like the DARPA of NIAID, even though it's part of the DoD. It's in their emails, U.S. Right to Know and other brilliant Sci and company went in there and did this. I asked, I don't know if they heard me, but they delivered. So Danielle is all over this thing. She is now June 2019. She is heavily involved in this Fauci Creed project, and it's about bats. I mean, it's bats and bats and bats and tons of bats, because that's what Danielle does. She researches bats, and there's an interesting comment in here if I can find it. So this is Danielle in June of 2019, which is she enters the BSL-4 in July of 2019. It doesn't come out till October, and says she was working on Ebola. But this is her making a comment, in June of 2019. All the SARS parts are very detailed with temperatures and dilutions. We can cut out these if needed. I mean, she's basically, doing heavy edits to a SARS-like grant going into the Wuhan BSL-4, So you'll see her making a lot of comments here. She's in Beijing at the time, coming out of the U.S. The China CDC bat lab, doing a CRISPR paper, and she's flying across China to Wuhan to go do a bat vaccine trial, basically. So you kind of got to know what to look for. But once you understand that DARPA diffuse and COVID has more to do with bats, then a lot more will make sense. So I think this leads to our next question. Yeah, this is from Pete. Barrick, whomever, could have removed the restriction sites, but has left some in to mess with us. Yeah, I mean, you never know with Barrick. Basically, maybe he did mess with us, but this is Valentine. This is Valentine in Germany. This is June when he started this project of his, June of 2021, which is before DARPA diffuse leaked, and he's basically found these restriction sites in the genome, and he thinks that's the way SARS-2 has been stitched together. So he was right, but he always thought Xi Jinping did it. And I'm like, well, what if Ralph did it and he didn't hide those type 2 restriction sites? How much extra work is that? A day, a week, a month? A rush prototype leaked. So, that's essentially what I think happened. It was a prototype that he was working on. So what Barrick did is when he received the prototype back, when he received the SARS-2 genome back from Wuhan, he did some weird stuff to the genome. So, Barrick, he could have basically recovered the genome with 0 genetic modifications. His reverse genetic system, in other words, would have fit perfectly for what emerged in Wuhan. 6 segments, 5 restriction sites, spaced in a way that he can handle. And Barrick made it look, like, that wasn't the way he wanted to do it. He decided to turn the 6 segments into 7, and he put a new restriction site between every existing restriction site. And by doing that, he's covering his tracks, and he's setting up a 2020 alibi for a 2024 testimony. And he goes on here, this is Barrick's words during testimony. He went quiet, by the way, after diffuse leaked, and, never talked to the press ever again. He was talking to the press. The last time, ironically, Barrick talked to the press was a CNN documentary on September 19, 2021. He was edited alongside Daniel Anderson, and they were both kind of pointing the finger subtly at the BSL-2, but then diffuse leaked 2 days later, and neither one of them has ever spoken to anyone ever again, as far as I'm concerned. But under threat of a subpoena, Barrick showed up and gave a testimony 6 hours, and this was his only excuse, basically, or alibi. It's a pathetic piece of work. He's talking about Valentine. By the way, you can see how I engineered the SARS-2 genomes. This is published, and you'll see it's completely different than this. Yeah, it is completely different because he cooked it up to be different. So he set up himself for an alibi, and he coordinated this move he did. Again, turning the 6 segments into 7, using 7 restriction sites. And he coordinated that with his UTMB postdoc. So, someone else asked a fun question. They just dropped in for some bat soup, nothing to see here. I love this story, because...
So what I want to show you this is because
This guy right here is Billy Koresh. He's on the DARPA Diffuse proposal, and here he is on stage in February 2020, showing us a video, not from Wuhan, from some exotic Pacific island in the middle of nowhere, in the Pacific Ocean, where they actually have bats on the menu. And Wuhan, you will not find bats in the Wuhan wet market, but you will find it in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And someone like him knows this because he's on the DARPA Diffuse bid trying to vaccinate bats in that Wuhan Institute of Virology. So they knew they were implicated one way or another. And this guy right here is Joe Lieberman. I think he's passed away recently, unfortunately, but he was a big biodefense hawk. And here's the video they're showing. So if you remember the bat soup rumors early on in the pandemic, Billy Koresh, Peter Daszak's number 2 of EcoHealth, started it. He's showing this video on stage at the Hudson Institute in February 2020. I mean, none of us even really knew what Wuhan was, and here they are getting way ahead of the pandemic to basically divert everyone's attention away. I mean, I just love this thing. And then here's this guy. His name is what is his name? I've got his email here. So, I forgot his name. Now I'm going to lose it because I lost my search. It'll come to me in a minute, but I can't think of it. Anyways, Fauci essentially, Chertow is his name. That's his name, Daniel Chertow. Let's see if I can search for it here without wasting too much time on it. But Daniel Chertow was basically the guy sitting next to Billy Koresh. And he was the one that kind of started the rumors. Well, not the rumors. He started the natural origin thing. So this is it. It showed up. So this Daniel Chertow right there, sitting next to Billy Koresh, diverting our attention away from the Wuhan market, has been given the okay by Fauci. I love this, on February 1st of 2020. And this thing was on February 10th of 2020. He's been given the okay by Fauci himself. No problem with Dan doing this. He basically, and they gave him a script to read during the press conference. This virus is natural. There's nothing to see here. I mean, I'm basically making the point that Fauci, he's funded DARPA Diffuse. He knows what's leaked from that Wuhan BSL-4. Does he know Danielle Anderson was his contractor working on it? Probably not. Not till after the pandemic and all this other stuff came about. So it just shows you who moved fast to cover this thing up. So another question here on Substack: if SARS-2 doesn't infect Chinese bats, why was it sent to the Wuhan Institute of Virology BSL-4? So this is the answer, as best I can tell you without getting too far into the weeds. I don't know. Here they are. They is John Epstein and who is it? Tony Shantz of Colorado State. They want to import Chinese bats, but this is after the pandemic, March of 2020. And the CDC has concerns about them doing stuff like that, bringing a foreign species into the U.S., so they won't let them do it. So they had to go to Wuhan to test this thing. That's essentially the whole story of SARS-CoV-2 in the grand scheme of things. It's I wish I could find that one little piece that I wanted, and I can't do it here because I don't have the thing pulled up. It would have been nice to have it though. We'll move on from it though. Maybe it's down here. Give me a second. It's not. Never mind. I've lost it. I must have closed it. So there's that one. And then what's the last question here? That was the last question. A lot of times though, people ask. He went on to follow up. Well, that makes sense. Paid attention. What about this other paper? So this is, if you want to start somewhere, basically on the origins of SARS-CoV-2, start here on this paper. So this was late 2018. It was an interesting paper because it involves the two primary suspects of SARS-CoV-2. And they basically went in here, and again, this is after DARPA has turned them down, and they've now teamed up together, and they want to infect bats, and they want to insert furin cleavage sites. So that's what intracellular proteasis means. So that's, that's kind of the idea. Insert a furin cleavage site, and then maybe they can infect the bats. But it's not any kind of bat. It's not a Chinese horseshoe bat. It's an Egyptian fruit bat, which is the SARS-2 reservoir host, the unnatural SARS-2 reservoir host. But here they are at the very bottom. This kind of closes up the question about why they went to Wuhan to test this thing. Therefore, it would be interesting to perform an experimental inoculation study using Chinese horseshoe bats, from which we have one. That's basically SARS-1. Was isolated to see if we can get more efficient virus replication. So they want to infect Chinese horseshoe bats here in late 2018, early 2019. And you had to go to Wuhan to do that. And Danielle Anderson was the one with the access to the live bats inside the Wuhan BSL-4. They thought it was safe. until it wasn't. So that's kind of where we'll leave it here. And just to leave it on a little bit of a low note or high note. I love this one because there's a lot of people that go around and say there was no virus, there was no pathogen. What I contend, the lab that created this thing was able to freeze it and take a picture of it for us using a cryogenics microscope. So life comes full circle. We'll end it there. Just hopefully a Q&A to get us up to speed. If you got any questions, feel free to email me, here, or comment, on the Substack, or check out the book. It's a lot better than listening to me talk all day about this. It's a narrative that people can follow. If I've come to realize the less you have invested in this, the more open-minded you are, the more it makes sense, ironically. So yeah, I'll leave it there, and we'll try this another time with some more questions for me. Thanks, guys. Bye.